Hi, welcome back to the night of. If you made it this far, congratulations. In this chapter, we're going to look at the last remaining 6 moves of the night of that we haven't yet looked at. That covers the 6th move a3, 6h4, 6 knight b3, and the latest addition to the weird 6 moves family, the 6 bishop d2. There probably are more 6 moves, but they make probably really no sense, because I think we covered all sensible and not so sensible moves with this. But let's see. e4, c5, knight f d6, d4, cd, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6 is the knight of. And here white has these 4 options that I mentioned. We had already covered in previous chapters: bishop to g5, bishop to e3, f3 is just the same as bishop e3 followed by f3, bishop e2 obviously, bishop to d3, bishop to c4. We covered h3, g3, a4, a3, rook g1, and queen moves, queen e2, queen d3, queen f3, and yeah, here we have left h4, knight b3, a3 as I mentioned, and bishop to d2. There aren't many more moves left. b4 and b3 make very little sense against the e5 setups, and also rook b1 doesn't make sense against e5 setup. Queen to d2 has it's a very awkward looking move for various reasons, I imagine. And yeah, I think the whole board is now covered in arrows. There is somebody made a joke once about bishop f4, then after e5 he'll win a piece, so yeah, that's not there. Knight f3 is one move I haven't mentioned, but it doesn't seem to make much sense. We can play knight c6 for example simply, and this e5 push is out of the window. Also knight d7 I guess would be perfectly fine. So yeah, that's that. Let's look at the 4 moves that we are going to discuss here. First, let's start with knight b3. Knight b3 is a very creative idea. It's been played by, it was introduced to the relatively high level, the very high level by Bartel, Mateusz Bartel from Poland, very creative player. He played against Jarosław Wojtaszek, and against Jarosław Wojtaszek it was pretty clever choice, because Wojtaszek, one of the biggest knight of experts of our times, he, just like our course, whenever possible goes for the e5 setup, and against that knight b3 is very clever. Of course, knight moves out of the way already, and after e5 white can go bishop g5 and get this bishop e2, knight b3, bishop g5 system without having wasted time on bishop e2. So after e5, bishop g5, so with bishop e7, white takes, plays queen d3, then long castle, and enjoys pretty decent position. We shouldn't do e5, but I propose the move e6 here. There are of course alternatives. g6 seems still quite risky because the long castle plans are still there, but there are other ways, like knight c6 is interesting, and also knight bd7 is interesting. But I think e6 is very good. Now the point is that after g4, which is white's idea, he's going for this kingside push. Now his problem is that knight on b3 is in fact very passive, and whereas on d4 it was putting pressure on the e6 pawn, which could be relevant sometimes after g5, h4, h5, g6 push. Here knight on b3 is really very passive, and it moved there voluntarily, so e6 setup is very justified. After e6, g4 we play b5, we start our own expansion, and here white has 3 different moves. Sometimes they transpose, sometimes they don't, so the direct g5 is met by b4. Note that without bishop g2, bishop b7 included, this is good. With it's no longer good. The difference is that after knight d5 here, we can take knight takes e4, take this strong central pawn. In fact, that game between Bartel and Wojtaszek, it went bishop g2, bishop b7, g5, b4, knight d5, and but actually got into some trouble. So this is an important difference. But after g5, b4, 95, 94, black is fine. White can try bishop e3, very clever move, threatening bishop b6. We cannot take here on d5 because after queen d5 the knight and the rook is hanging. But we play knight c5, a strong move, blocking the bishop. And after knight takes b4, queen c7, followed by bishop b7, knight b7, we have a good position. We snatch the central pawn, and white knights on b3 and b4 leave a rather poor impression. Instead of g5, a3 is also sensible, stopping b4. Here I propose to go for bishop b7. Now bishop g2 is the most natural setup, and I should mention before bishop g2 also that queen e2 has been played by Paragon once, and very interesting, clever idea, but we have here a strong pawn push in the center with d5. White hasn't yet developed his bishop to the long diagonal, and so we are able to strike, and this is pretty good for black. Bishop g2 is main, and here I recommend knight f to d7. Sooner or later the knight has to go there, as well as sooner or later g5 has to be played, so knight f d7, g5 can be included right away. And now we play knight c6. In this setup against knight on b3, we always develop this knight to c6, also because there is no real options. For example, knight b6, knight bd7 setup is not working because of knight a5 hitting the bishop, so knight c6 is the way to go. Knight is also quite well placed here, sometimes supporting the b4 push. h4 is the most natural move to start with h4. Of course, white can start with different moves, but eventually he needs this h pawn for kingside play, bishop e7. And here I look at three options. Queen e2 is possible. White wants to follow up with bishop e3 and long castle. We have various options, but I like this move a5. The thing is, if we even send the knight to c4, sometimes white is ready to give up his e3 bishop after castling long. But I like here very much the move a5. This is the extra option we have. A very cool pawn sacrifice, pretty much for nothing concrete, but for some tempi and good dynamic play. After queen b5 we go queen c7, and bishop a6 is already very unpleasant to meet. Also, white can now not castle short so easily, and in case he ever tries to castle long, these files are already open here. Knight b5 is another move. Now we go a4, knight d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and now bishop a6. Again, unpleasant move to face. Queen e3. White has to move the queen somewhere. This seems to be the most harmonious square. And now queen b6. Queen b6 is important to stop bishop d2 and long castle. If white were to castle long and establish a bishop on c3, he would have a pretty good position. But we stop long castle plans, and also short castle is not so easy now with the bishop on a6. So white tries to do that with knight e2. Now we go queen b7. Good square. There is basically no danger in this extra. After e5 there's always d5 potentially. And after short castle we play rook c8, and currently the c2 pawn is hanging. It's pretty awkward to protect it, not clear how to, and if white does, then we will play with h6 ideas, trying to get counterplay against these overexposed pawns. Knight can also join via e5, and this position is very promising for black, despite that we are pawn down currently. Very cool pawn sack. Now after bishop e3 we can play knight c2 e5. It is important here to send this knight to c4, not that one. The point is that after knight c e5, queen e2, knight c4 long castle, white will be quite fine if we are to take on e3, as I mentioned earlier. But here we have rook c8, and now it's important that the c file is open, so knight takes a3 becomes a threat, as the c3 knight is hanging, and here black gets this important tempo and has a good position. But finally, 12f4 is a move I considered. White so often trying to impress us with his pawns, but again without the knight on d4, this is not too dangerous. Here I like sending the knight to c4, stopping this bishop e3, queen e2 idea. f5 is sensible, and here we can castle. Also possible to go knight c4, knight or knight a4. There are many options in this position. It's very complex. White is trying to put pressure, but this is a rather double-edged double-edged idea. He, of course, does put some pressure on our king side. At the same time, his pawns are also potentially overexposed, as his king will probably have to go castle short, as he's not in time to get the long castle because of this knight c4 ideas. Here we castle short. Now I look at two options: white can castle or play queen g4. If castle, yeah, there are many options, but I like knight a4. I think it's very clever. Now the idea is that if white goes knight e2, now we play knight e5. We might want to take on f5 and trade these bishops, and if white goes knight bd4, now we go d5, and now you see why we played knight a4. The knight from c3 no longer contributes to fighting for the d5 square. So that's the idea of knight a4. After 14 queen g4, we can take on f5, ef5, and play first rook e8, threatening to give a discovered check with bishop f8. And after castle short, we go knight e5, trade light squared bishops, queen goes somewhere, we take on g2, queen g2. And here, once again, these pawns are both a strength, but also a weakness, as the king is now rather exposed. I like the idea of d5, getting some squares in the center. After f6, we have strong move bishop d6. F takes g7 we will ignore. We obviously don't have to address it. This famously, these pawns in front of the king, they are quite good protectors, be it black pawns or white pawns as well. But here we, of course, don't take. We play rook c8, activating our rook, and with the rook c4, rook g4 have lots of counterplay. And if white tries to bring the knight to f5, with knight d4, we have very strong idea simply to go bishop c5, pinning the knight. So yeah, this is my little essay on move 8 a3. A bishop g2 is also possible. Now there is an extra option of going knight f d7, and then after g5 try to go knight c6 and delay the move bishop b7. But finally I have decided to also recommend the main move bishop b7. After bishop b7, now a3 will transpose to a3, a3 first to 8 a3. Also after g5, knight d7, again a3 will transpose. But let's look at other moves. What if white doesn't go for a3? As I mentioned, after g5, yeah, before we don't do this. Here knight d5 is very strong. Now knight d7, yes, if white castles, first we go bishop e7, f4, and I like this idea of before kicking the knight. As white hasn't played a3, we'll kick the knight to e2, knight comes to c6, and later we want to play a5. And we have in general two different central breakthroughs depending on the circumstances. Either e5, using the fact that the g5 pawn is weak and white cannot push f5 because of bishop takes g5, or sometimes knight b6 and d5, another central break. With such passive knights, this pawn, these advanced pawns are not particularly dangerous. 10h4 is the most direct, of course, and here I like this idea of Nepo to go before. Very clever to do that before knight c6, and yeah, I was quite impressed that Yannis has discovered this finesse. Very subtle. Now knight a4 here is losing to bishop c6, and that's why white has to go knight e2, and now you go knight c6. So making this move order more clever. If you start with knight c6 and then play it before, white gets the extra option of knight a4. And obviously if white starts with a3, then we are back to the 8 a3 once again. So 10h4 b4, knight e2, knight c6. And here there are two games actually of Peter Swidler against Jan Nepomniachtchi. One was in rapid and second one was in the classical game. In the first game he played f4. Here Jan played h6. This idea worked out quite well, so I like this. Black, it's not only white who's playing on the king side, again with white's knight so far away. This makes sense. g6 is now not so good because e6 is not hanging. So Swidler went bishop e3, Jan took hg, rook takes h1, bishop h1, traded h pawns and rooks, and now went a5, intending perhaps a4 and sometimes e5 push. And white's pieces are rather coordinated, and black managed to play a very good game and win. Later Swidler tried castle. His idea was that after h6 he now wants to go g6, despite the knight the knight is not on d4. Peter still tried to challenge this e6 square. In fact, black could also just play bishop e7 and just play normal with castle and a5, nothing wrong with that, but h6, which Jan played, worked out fine. Peter played g6, now Jan took on h4. It's possible also to play a move like queen f6 to bring the queen to f7, but yeah, this queen h4 worked out very fine, it's a fine move, no need to be scared. Peter was probably bluffing, hoping that Jan would get impressed or scared, but Jan, of course, is not bluffed very easily. G takes f7, king takes f7. King is not the most beautiful on f7, but it's okay. Again, with white pieces not being around the king, it's fine there. White went a3. He included a3, a5, ab, ab, rook 8, bishop a8 for one reason or the other, and now played f4. Here black played knight f6. After f5, close the position with e5. It's possible to play it more ambitiously with ef or knight e5, but e5 is the safest. Now white, the best white has is to set up a move repetition with rook f3, d5, or pretty much any other move white has to repeat. Rook h3, queen g4, rook g3, queen h4. Black's king is quite safe, but the queen is sort of half trapped and is trapped in any case into a repetition. But of course, yeah, if you, I mean, of course, there's no need to. It's not like this a forced draw or anything. Yeah, 13 queen f6 is possible. Besides this deviation on move 19, where knight e5 or ef is possible, and mostly 12 bishop e7. I think it's just a very playable move, leading to the normal position with castle. For that we go a5, a4, and try to find the right moment for e5 or d5 push. Again, white's knight on b3 is really very passive. Not a great combination with aggressive kingside push. Nonetheless, an interesting playable line for white. 6a3 is also there. Now, yeah, a3, by the way, an interesting system. It used to be considered very timid because after e5, white would usually just drop the knight back to f3. But then Magnus Carlsen came up with an interesting idea of knight f5, which we'll look at in great detail. So 7 knight f3 is it's just a worse version of like a4 knight f3 setups. Black can play simply bishop e7, bishop c4, bishop e6, the usual stuff. Bishop e2, knight d7, castle. Again, rook 8, bishop e3. Yeah, don't blunder obviously into this. As those who have watched my series in chronological order and have seen all the chapters so far, they already are sick of me repeating this, but it's a very important trap in which you shouldn't fall into, because it is, if you don't know it, it's very easy to fall into, of course, but yeah, we know it by now. And yes, here after 11 bishop 3 we play knight c5, and these positions we had seen them already countless times. And as I mentioned, yeah, the move a3 is just a worse version of a4. It doesn't control the b5 square and doesn't have a big point. But Magnus came up with knight f5. Very, very interesting idea. Now after d5, which is a standard response, bishop g5, d4, pawn on a3 makes quite a bit of sense. White takes on f6, and here there are two different ways of playing. You can take with the pawn or with the queen. I think taking with the queen it leads to a good position for black, where the best white has is a forced move repetition, or in terms of professional chess, I mean, it is quite relevant, but I'm not sure, of course, that all amateurs or club players are that deeply prepared. But in case you want to avoid that move repetition that I will, that my recommendation eventually ends in, then you can also take with the pawn, and I give that also in great detail because I just wanted to look at these fascinating positions as well. So first of all, the extra option g takes f6. Now that leads to very specific, unusual positions. White has this strong outpost on f5. At the same time, we have potentially a lot of dark squares. Also, the knight can be captured, and that is what we usually play when it will then be a question who will control the e4 square. But let's look at the one move at a time. Knight a2 is quite interesting. White wants to just white has to place the knight somewhere, and eventually the knight can come back into the game via c1 or b4. Here I propose to take on f5, e takes f5, and now queen d5. In this structure, now that it has changed, everything is around the e4 square. If we were to imagine that white would have like a knight on e4 from here, yeah, we would be close to strategically lost. I'm just trying to think of how lost we are if we were to trade the knight, but basically it's all irrelevant. Yeah, white would be doing very well, as he would also be able to control the c2 pawn very well with the bishop on d3. But that's all fairy tales. Here we play queen d5 and we grab control of the e4 square ourselves. After bishop e2 we simply go e4. No better way to control a square than by placing a pawn on it. So e4 cast on knight c6, and here white starts an important sequence which is enough for him to equalize, but not more. Knight c3, queen e5, f4, strong forced play. Now we take on f3, bishop f3, and here dc5 leads to equality, rook e1, bishop c5, king h1, bishop e3. Whereas, and white can, take on c6, bc, play queen f3, and win back the piece, and castle, like 3cb, and so on, and it's just enough for equality. But we can also play for more with long castle, move 16, f knight, e4, king b8, play this very complex position. Now black has very strong outpost on e5 for the queen or the knight. Bishop can also land on e3. But another idea is to go just bishop d6, establish either a strong battery here on this diagonal, or force white to take on d6 when we take, and then white no longer has this good knight on e4, and also h5, h4 is always there in the position. So all in all, around the balanced position where we have the dark squares and white plays on the light squares, so it balances each other out. That's for knight a2. Knight e2 is very clever in case we take on f5, and the white knight can develop itself via g3, but we will not take on to f5. Here we have a very strong move, queen b6, a very concrete move. White doesn't have an easy way of protecting the b2 pawn, and his problem is if he goes rook b1. Now we go bishop e6, and the idea is that we're threatening bishop a2 actually. If white addresses it with queen c1, we play knight d7, knight e3, knight c5. Knight is excellent here. These two knights, they are not so great. As we know, the knights are not good at defending each other. Here basically two knights are fighting for just one square. So that is a common issue in chess in general. And yeah, here black is doing well. We want to play rook c8, and these pieces are very awkward. And again, it's only one good knight, the other one is of course bad. 12 knight e3 immediately is interesting, not to waste time on queen c1, and now, well, it would have been interesting if after bishop a2, bishop d3, we were only to win an exchange with bishop b1, queen b1, but white's problem is that we're not only winning exchange, we can also win a pawn now, and that is a little too much material. Black is just up an exchange and the pawn, and this dominance over the f5 square is not enough to compensate for all of that. That is for 10 knight e2. Take knight b1 is the most natural move. Knight is heading towards d2. Now we take and play again queen d5. Here, if white plays knight d2, we have bishop h6. We don't give white time to establish knight on e4. We might want to take the knight and bring the knight to c5, control the e4 square very well. If white plays queen d3, which is the most often played move, with idea knight d2, knight e4. We have our own knight d7, knight c5 ideas. We go knight d7, knight d2, and knight c5. If white tries to stop knight c5 with b4, we have a5 undermining that pawn. Yeah, and here we have good control over the e4 square and a good position. 12 queen h5 it has never been played before, I believe, but it's a very critical move. White wants to develop with knight d2 and stops bishop h6. And we play knight d7, knight d2 on castle. And here, if white plays bishop d3, we can take the pawn, bishop e4, queen g5, queen f3, knight c5, and white does have the e4 square for now, but bishop h6 is coming, and we have won a pawn, and pawns matter. 14 queen f3 is a safer choice for white, trying to keep the g2 pawn and still fight for that e4 square. And now I believe we have to play a very strong sequence. We play first queen a5, intending bishop h6 or bishop b4 for that matter, pinning this knight. If we trade this knight, we're very happy. We'll then establish, of course, good control over the e4 square with knight c5. Here white plays a strong thematic move, king d1, and now we have to show a good understanding of this position. If white is to get knight to e4 and then later bishop to d3, eventually he will sort out his king with, for example, g3, king e2, king f1, king g2, and then we'll have a very, very sad position with black. Very little counterplay, but here it is black to move, and we have a very, very strong dynamic idea, and that is e4, a brilliant positional pawn sacrifice. We free that e5 square for the knight, and that is absolutely huge. Especially, or mostly, that makes sense, of course, because the king on d1 is in the center, so that would be a huge factor if the position were to open up, and so we do that. We open up by force. Knight e4, knight to knight e5. I mean, very stylish and cool is the move d3 as well, and it's not even so bad, but it's a little bit too much. Computer gives white some advantage here, but it's very stylish, of course, to give up second pawn as well and try to open the center. But no need. Knight e5 first is better. King b3, and now simply king b8. There's no rush any longer, and just to highlight the difference in the kings, our king is so much safer, and with the knight on e5 now white does not have this dominance any longer, and black has excellent compensation for the pawn, and position appears to be very good. This e4 definitely something to remember. But if you prepare for the world championship match and your opening is an Najdorf, you can take with the queen on f6, knight d5, now queen c6. But actually in that very first game played queen d8, which is very sensible, of course, very normal square on d8, especially without the dark squared bishop. The dark square looks attractive. Now black wants to push g6, but there is a very nasty idea, queen g4. I remember when I was walking by the board in Vaikandre, and I saw this position, and Carlsen played queen g4. He had a lot of time on his clock. It was clear it was prepped, and I was looking at the position. I was thinking, what is happening after g6? Isn't the knight pinned? Discovered checks don't work. Knight d6, bishop b6. I was thinking, what is the point? What is the point? And then finally it hit me. The point is to go queen g3, hitting the e5 pawn, and that is very, very nasty, actually. So that's for queen d8. That's why we don't do that. We play queen c6. Now the difference is that after queen g4, g6, queen g3, we have knight d7, and important difference is now after knight takes d4, e takes d4, knight c7 check, we have the d8 square. The queen is no longer on d8. We have king d8, and after knight a5, b5, that knight is trapped, and we'll have two pieces for the rook. So very subtle but very important nuance why queen c6 is much stronger than queen d8. Here white can play also 11 c4. That's probably the best move now that queen g4 is not working. And now there is the move g6, forcing the piece sacrifice that will keep reoccurring. But instead of that, stronger is to start with bishop e6, or I'm not sure stronger, but let's say cleaner solution from a theoretical viewpoint. And now f4 is the best. Otherwise, we get to develop with knight d7 and g6. If we get to kick the knights away, the other knight on d5 is not going to be enough for white to have an advantage or anything. We will have a very strong dark square control, this massive protected passed pawn. All these dark squares will be ours, and we're going to be doing quite great. One good piece is not enough often. But white plays concrete with f4. We also keep knight away with g6. We don't want to let f5, knight takes d4 to happen, so g6. Now white should give a check on f6 first. If he takes on d4, e4, queen d4, we have f6. The idea is that after knight takes f6, we have king f7. And here white does have 3 pawns, but we have this dark squared bishop, and it's very advantageous for black, this position. The king is pretty safe on f7, in fact. Much more critical is knight f6 check, and after king d8, now knight d4, but this leads by force to a move repetition. After e4, queen d4, we have to play queen d6. King c8 is losing to knight d5, threatening the rook, and also threatening knight b6 check, so we go queen d6. White has to play queen c3. Of course, he doesn't want to trade queens, being a piece down. We go queen c6 back. Now if white goes long castle or rook d1 check, we simply play king c8. We have that extra piece for just 2 pawns. We better there. because knight d5 we just move rook g8. So white has to go back to d4, and now again king c8 is now not possible because of knight d5, knight b6. So queen on d4 is crucial to protect this b6 square. And yeah, after queen d6 this leads to a remove repetition, and it happened in the game Kagananda Yilmaz, Abu Dhabi 2019. So I believe, yeah, this is the forced way of equalizing against the line. And GF gives you, of course, much more double-edged play. So you can choose. Again, I don't like, against the move like 6a3 to suddenly only recommend one line where where white can make a move repetition. I find it just inconsistent. Let's say against the English attack, which is one of the most dangerous ways of playing the most main lines, we go for a sharp position, and against a3 suddenly we allow some move repetition. So that's why I like to give in such cases always two options. And also it is a knight, of course, not a Berlin course. So there should always be room for fighting chess. 6 bishop d2. Okay, let's look at it last. It's really okay. Anyway, let's look at it in this order: bishop d2. Yeah, this is the idea of my my countryman Lucas van Forest. It's a funny idea, I have to say. Against e6, white once again has the g4, g5 idea. Against g6, white is going to lose the full tempo, play the dragon with f3, bishop e3, queen d2. Even with an extra move a6, it's still not so simple for black. Dragon is, of course, playable, but a very dangerous opening for black. He has to know his theory very well, so that's not worth it for us in this context. But of course, the main question is what happens after e5. And now the idea is that knight f5. d5 is met by queen f3, and now white is prepared to castle long. So actually, not such a pointless idea, this bishop d2, but it is okay. We go e5, knight f5. Yeah, again, moving the knight to b3 or f3 is of course possible, but then bishop d2 is just a waste of time. And okay, we know our development scheme. That's the good thing with the knight. Of course, as I'm always mentioned, I cannot cover every move literally, but there's no need, because you know the development scheme, so you will just develop and you have all the ideas and the maneuvers already well worked out, so you'll just employ one of them. After e5, knight f5, d5, queen f3, the line continues with d4. White plays knight d5. Now we can take the knight on d5, e d5, take the knight on f5. It's the easiest. G6 is also possible, but it's quite messy. Bishop f5 is the easiest, queen f5, now knight d7, develop the piece, protect the e5 pawn. We want to play g6, develop the bishop to g7. White has two options. They're transposing probably either long castle g6, queen f3, bishop g7, when white has nothing better than h4, and after h5 it leads to 12 h4, against which we play g6, queen f3, h5, long castle, and now bishop g7. And here we have to be slightly accurate with our move order after king b1, which is the universal and most useful move. Castle g4 allows white to open the position, so we start with knight c5, threaten e4 here. Bishop b4, we go rook c8, protect the knight, again resume the threat of e4 and keep the idea of castle in mind. If white goes g4, which is the most principled, now we go e4, queen f4, queen takes d5, and well, the complications continue, but black is very fine. After bishop g2, we can play d3. We can also start with castle, but basically d3, c3, castle short. Black can also play f5, which is very ambitious, but of course already much more risky. King will be quite open, and white will try to undermine our pawn chain later with f3. Castle is the easiest. Now after bishop c5, queen c5, bishop e4, it's important to play one very, very strong move, and that is the move queen d6. We threaten rook c3, which is unavoidable. King a1 is also met by rook c3. And after rook c3, we also threaten rook c1, queen b2 mate. So here our bishop gets opened up and becomes a monster bishop, and white has to be already very, very accurate to be able to continue the game. So not so hard. Basically after bishop d2, just e5, knight f5, d5, d4, take everything. And important thing is only to here not to castle too early, but to play knight c5 first. And finally the move 6h4, which became very popular. It was a funny story at some point when this whole trend of sixth move alternative started. I mean, especially 6a3, e5, knight f5, that was especially a sign sign that there are many more 6 moves than just the main bishop e3, bishop g5, bishop e2, bishop c4, h3, g3, and so on. So at some point it became clear that white can make almost any move in the Najdorf, and they are still they could still all have some point. And that around that point we had the training session with my trainer, and we had the Najdorf on the board, the position after move 6. Fortunately for us, there were not that many arrows as on this digital board here. It was just a clean Najdorf position, and my trainer, Dutch trainer, just made a move h4, and he said, "Yeah, probably even this makes sense." And then we both looked at the position, started thinking, and actually it does. And later on, h4 also became a move. So yeah, he was quite proud. Unfortunately, I was okay. I mean, I'm not sure I would want to introduce it. I'm not sure I want this kind of fame, but yeah, Erwin didn't get to introduce it, neither did I. But eventually, other people, of course, came up with this as well. It's one of the moves. Now, e6, of course, would be terribly naive. It would fall for g4, g5. When h4 suddenly becomes extremely useful. But of course we play differently here. I recommend the move e5. There are alternatives as well. Knight c6 is possible, and also a funky move h6 is possible. It's not even that clear if h4 is more useful than h6, but e5 of course much more principled. Knight f5, funny enough, is possible. I'm not sure it's been played, but now we go d5, queen f3, d4, similar to this bishop d2 line. In fact, it can even transpose, I think. Knight d5, knight d5, ed, bishop f5, queen f5, knight d7, and now bishop d2 transposes to that same thing, where we go g6, h5. And if white plays c3, we can play rook c8, and cd4 is met by bishop before check, so this c3 is not very dangerous. But the main move though is knight b3. Now we go bishop e7, and here white has 2 options that he tried so far. One was bishop g5. After bishop e6, white takes on f6 usually, and he's trying to argue that h4 might be more useful than move bishop e2. Instead of bishop takes f6, Fabiano once played queen d3, but in a pro chess league, I think, but it made no sense. Pro chess league is an online rapid tournament, but it makes no sense. You can just play knight b7, and I'm not sure at all what's the whole queen d3, bishop g5, h4 setup is all about, and the computer is also against it. I think Fabiano mixed something up. White has to take, and play g3 first, protect the h4 pawn. And yeah, the idea of g3 h4 is not so much to go bishop h3. I'm not sure bishop h3 is such a great threat, but the idea is to stop this bishop g5 move from happening. So our bishop on f6 is a little bit passive. We drop it to e7, at least protect the d6 pawn, intending knight d7, knight f6 sometimes. And here I look at 3 moves: bishop h3, queen d2, and queen d3. Let's look at queen d2 first. This one is actually the most played, I believe, so far. Now we play knight d7, long castle, knight f6. The knight is fighting for the d5 square. We are not scared of f4. And that's why we also postpone castle a little bit, so that f4, f5, g4 is not that dangerous. After f4, b5, f5, bishop d7, we put pressure on the e4 pawn, and we're really happy to have not castled. Sometimes you might even want to play the move h5 and block the king side when the king is actually quite safe in the center for now. Besides queen d2, yeah, 11 bishop h3 does not have much point after castle. There was one game in a Women's World Championship, Yip against Huang. White took, played queen g4, but black can just defend with rook f6, and then, as we know, the e6 pawn is a great asset, defends the d5 square. A very similar idea was played, if you remember, by Vladimir Kramnik. We had looked at it in the bishop e2, e5, knight b3 chapter, I believe. But this idea is not very good. The d5 square is under black's control. After long castle, black played knight c6, 4 b5, and had a very good position. So bishop h3 not the point. Queen d3 is actually is what I guess was Fabiano's idea. Probably his coach told him you play h4 and then later queen d3, and then he forgot where queen d3. But I don't know. It could also be just me speculating. But here queen d3 makes sense. The point is that after knight d7, long castle, Now after this knight f6 b5 setup, the queen on d3 protects the e4 pawn, so there are some knight d5 options compared to queen being on d2, so I think it's a pretty interesting idea. Now we play differently. I recommend b5. After f4 I recommend b4, forcing the matters. Now after knight d5, take on d5, queen d5 and castle. And we have this strange position. We don't have a light squared bishop, but we want to push a5, a4. White's king is going to be in some danger after that. And the computer finds a very sophisticated way of dealing with this a5, a4 threat. Something that I don't expect many of your opponents are going to be able to find without the computer. The move queen b7. The idea is after a5 now White can attack the knight via bishop h3 or bishop b5, and then there are some concrete issues. But Black is doing very well here, very fine. After bishop b5, we can play knight b6. It's more accurate here than a4. After f3 rook b8, the queen is stuck here within these 4 squares, and repetition is inevitable. Queen c6 rook c8, queen b7 rook b8, queen a6 rook a8. More challenging is bishop h3. Now the same thing is not possible because the c8 square is under protection after knight b6, f3, rook b8, queen c6. But there is the move a4, and the trading the knights leads to some roughly equal position. Bishop d7, for example, rook b8, queen a7, ab, cb, and now we can either repeat the moves with rook a8, rook b8, or we can even play just for play to play, basically ef, gf, bishop takes h4, and this position is around balanced. The bishops are of opposite colored, but there is life in the position as the queens are still on the board and so on. So yeah, both are possible. That I believe is covers it. Quite important, this queen d3, a new idea, and quite important to know this b5, b4. The knight f6 is a bit tricky, as I mentioned. There are some knight d5 ideas here. That is for bishop g5, but they also came up with another way of justifying this h4 push, bishop e2. This could also be reached via 6 bishop e2, e5, knight b3, bishop e7, and then h4. Not completely pointless. White is waiting for bishop e6. If we castle, White has g4, g5, which would be a disaster. We go bishop e6. Important to meet g4 with d5. But now that bishop is on e6, White goes f4. But of course, yeah, ef, bishop f4, White gets to capture in one go. But of course, yeah, this is rather speculative, but still actually quite unclear. And here I recommend the move b5. Now at f5, bishop d7, we're happy. g4, b4. White is not in time to push g5 because e4 pawn is in trouble. F takes e5, forcing an endgame is not dangerous. After d, queen d8, bishop d8, knight c5, knight c6. The endgame was quite balanced. Our knight is coming to d4. As we know, knight e6 fe structure is pretty decent for Black. d5 square is under control. These pawns are doing a great job controlling the center. This happened in Jorgensen Doronkin, some correspondent game 2018, which was equal. 10 g4 is the main continuation, very sharp. Now we follow with b4. Again, we don't give White time to kick us back. We follow with b4, knight d5, knight d5 ed, and now we have a choice. So far bishop c8 was played, but also bishop takes h4 check is very critical, obviously, as the pawn is hanging with check. Let's look first at bishop c8. Now White goes g5, stopping the bishop h4 threat, advancing the pawn, and now we castle. It's a very unclear position. White has advanced a little bit, but it's not clear where his king is going to go. On the queen side, it's going to come under a5, a4. On the king side, where it most likely will end up, then again we have this situation where the exposed pawns are both an asset and also a disadvantage, because yeah, White's king will lack some protection. Similar to this positions we saw in knight b3 variation, move 6, where again, yeah, this pushing pawns in front of the king, it's you know, it's the coin, two-sided coin, as they say. But let's look at some moves. 14 bishop e3, a5. Again, we need to push that a4. A4 push. If White plays 15 bishop d3, we can play with f5. It's a very complex position. I think it deserves further investigation, but okay, it's a bit too obscure to spend too much time on it. 15 a4 has been played in a corresponding game. So white definitely burns bridges on the queen side. He'll never castle there because after ba rook a3 it's illegal. But okay, yeah. Now that after a4, position is just very unclear. It's not clear where white king will go. If it goes short, then the yeah, it will still be pretty vulnerable. And next we want to actually finish our development finally, bishop f5 or knight d7, depending on circumstances. But just a very, very unclear position. The computers claim it's all around balanced. So bishop c8 is certainly playable. I wanted to look at bishop takes h4, a much more forcing move. We want to snatch the pawn. Let's look at it. King f1. Now bishop c8. Now it's important that g5 does not trap the bishop. We have that very important g3 square. After bishop g3, suddenly the bishop is completely back in the game. So white should play probably 14 queen d3, and that's very strong. It controls the g3 square and now wants to push g5. So here black has only moved g5, very strong move, rescuing the bishop. Here white can either try to simplify with fg, which leads to by force to an equal endgame, or play for complications with a very murky move f5. a5, yeah, it's very murky business. Our bishop is both out of play and at the same time does quite a bit on h4. The e4 square is potentially up for grabs for the white knight, but our knight will also come to f6, so a likely scenario is that we trade the knights on e4. And then yes, we have this extra pawn, very, very double-edged position. Knight d7 is what we should play. If knight d2, we can start with h5. We always want to break on the king side, that's part of our plan. Knight d4 is met by knight f6. We trade these knights, and it's very unclear what's going on here, but it seems that black is doing fine. 16a3 is also interesting. Now ba is possible, but I propose to play more dynamic and give white the pawn for some tempi. h5, ab, hg. Now we also took a pawn. Once again, we want to bring the knight to f6 at some point. After bishop e3, strong developing move, we play another very inventive move, rook h7. There are options, but rook h7 is very strong and it's not as strange as it looks. We actually want to play knight f6 very desperately, bringing the knight into the game, opening the bishop, controlling the e4 square. But after knight f6, there is bishop takes g5. Bishop g5 and rook h8. So here we play rook h7, so that after knight d2, let's say knight f6, bishop g5 is no longer a threat because the rook is protected. So rook h7, very creative move. And now, yeah, this is a very messy position. The modern computers evaluate it around level. Some go slightly into black's favor, but mostly around level. Very, very complex stuff. So one of our ideas is to include the a8 rook in the game with rook b8, hit the b4 pawn, then potentially after c3 maybe rook b5, hit the d5 pawn. Another idea is to get the queen into the game via h8, so after king e7, queen h8, or after king f8, king g7. And yeah, just a very, very complex situation. White has this 3 against 1 on the queen side, we have this 3 against 1 on the king side. A very murky business, but I believe black shouldn't be the one complaining with that. 15 at g5 is a lot more safe for white. After bishop g5, queen g5, queen d2 is very strong. This pawn was hanging and queen f4 check was there in the position, so queen d2 takes that all out. And after queen takes d2, knight takes d2, white is a pawn down, but he has lots of targets. Our d6 pawn is quite vulnerable. Knight is coming to e4 or c4, a3 is coming, the other rook will be activated. This rook is super active. So here black should be modest and actually focus on his piece development and just go for equality. Rook g8 against rook h7. Here again we don't get greedy, we play just because of the back rank issues later, we play just king e7 or knight d7. Well, we eventually want to play both, just wanted to finish development and get an equal position. After 19a3, seamless is to take rook a3, take on g4, and we took already the second pawn, but we will give one back for sure. After in 21 knight c4, we play knight d7. We want to finish development, give back the material. Bishop g4, rook g4, knight d6, king a7, knight f5. The smartest is to go back, threatens to rook f4, and yeah, white has compensation for the pawn. He will probably regain it, but we have also finished development and should be around equal here. After 21 bishop g4 we take with rook g4, and after rook h7 we are in time to develop with knight d7, as rook h8 can be met by knight f8. And here we finished our development. Again, white has active pieces, enough compensation for the pawn, but so little material is left on the board. It should already be very, very equalish. Yeah, this is for bishop takes h4. Of course, bishop c8 leads to much more complex play as well, and is also a good option. As you had seen, this h4 move is quite interesting. It's for a reason that's been played a few times. So, in fact, all of these moves were sensible. Knight b3 also very sharp. Yeah, bishop d2 had this one idea with long castle, was also not so bad. Yeah, an interesting chapter. Fascinating developments in general lately with all these sixth moves incoming. But we have covered, I believe, all of the sensible sixth moves with this chapter. And now, if you had been watching this series in an orderly fashion from top to bottom, then with this we complete our Najdorf journey. But of course, Najdorf would not be the Najdorf without all the sidelines that white has, and in the upcoming chapters we are going to look at all the sidelines, and it's going to be a lot of fun as well. So for now, thank you for watching, and see you in the next chapter.